If you have ever finished a meal and watched your blood sugar climb higher than it should, this video is going to change how you think about what happens next. Not what you ate, not what you should have avoided, what you do in the 15 minutes after you put down your fork. Because here is the counterintuitive truth that most people with diabetes have never been told. After you eat, your muscles can become one of the most powerful exit routes for glucose in your entire body. And they can do it even when insulin is struggling to do its job. Yes, this works even if you are insulin resistant. Most people are told the only answer is medication, fewer carbs, or smaller portions. Nobody explains that there is a back door that your muscles can open on their own, completely independent of insulin. In this video, I'm going to show you the science behind that door, give you a realistic post-meal routine you can start using today, and then explain the part most people never hear about. Because lowering one blood sugar spike is useful, but restoring insulin sensitivity is the real goal. And those are not the same thing. If you want our free guide on how to build insulin sensitivity from the ground up with food, movement, and lifestyle, comment guide below. It's completely free. Just comment guide below. Now, let's get into what the research actually found. A 2022 study published in iScience found something that genuinely surprised researchers. Activating one small muscle in the lower leg reduced the rise in blood sugar after a glucose drink by 52%. And the participants did it while sitting in a chair. That muscle is called the soleus. It sits underneath the larger calf muscle you can see in the mirror, and it helps you stand, walk, and maintain your posture throughout the day. Think of it like a pilot light on a gas stove. It is small, quiet, and designed to keep burning for a very long time without getting tired. The researchers developed a seated movement called the Soleus push-up. Participants consumed a glucose drink and then performed carefully controlled contractions of the soleus muscle while seated. Compared with sitting still, the movement produced 52% less post-meal glucose excursion and 60% less hyperinsulinemia, meaning a much smaller spike in insulin. The difference in blood glucose levels was approximately 50 milligrams per deciliter during part of the testing window. That means their bodies handled the same glucose load with dramatically less glucose sitting in the bloodstream and much less insulin needed to manage it. But here is the honest context, because I don't want to oversell this. The participants performed this movement continuously for hours with only brief interruptions. And the researchers carefully optimized the technique to keep the soleus working in a very specific way. This is not the same as doing a quick set of calf raises and sitting back down. The benefit comes from sustained, repeated muscle activation, not from a single short burst. A newer study involving people with prediabetes found a smaller but still meaningful reduction of approximately 32% in blood glucose during an oral glucose tolerance test when the Soleus push-up was used. So the effect appears to be real, but the size of it depends on the person, how long the muscle stays active, what you ate, your medications, and your current level of insulin sensitivity. Here's how to do it. Sit in a chair with both feet flat on the floor and your knees bent at about 90 degrees. Keep the front of your foot on the ground. Then lift your heel as high as you comfortably can, pause briefly at the top, and let it return to the floor. Keep repeating in a smooth rhythm. It looks like a seated calf raise, but the goal is not to squeeze as hard as possible or race through the reps. The goal is gentle, repeated contractions that you can sustain without getting tired. The reason the soleus is so interesting is that it contains a large proportion of slow twitch muscle fibers, the kind designed for endurance rather than power. In the 2022 study, researchers found it could maintain elevated energy use for hours while drawing very little from its own stored fuel. Instead, it kept pulling fuel directly from the bloodstream. That is the mechanism. When the soleus contracts, it opens an exit ramp for glucose that does not fully depend on insulin to work. Your muscle pulls glucose out of your blood because it needs fuel, not because insulin told it to. That is why movement can lower blood sugar, even in people who are insulin resistant. Now, here's the part most people miss when they hear about Soleus push-ups. As impressive as that 52% number is, the best studied and most practical post-meal strategy for most people is still walking. In a randomized crossover study, 41 adults with type 2 diabetes were studied over 2 periods. During one period, they walked for 30 minutes once per day. During the other period, they walked for 10 minutes after each of their 3 main meals. The total walking time was exactly the same in both conditions, but the post-meal walks lowered overall post-meal glucose more effectively. The biggest benefit came after dinner, when people tended to eat more carbohydrate and then sit for long stretches. Post-meal walking reduced glucose exposure by about 12% across all meals and by about 22% after the evening meal compared with the single daily walk. A 2023 systematic review and meta-analysis reached the same conclusion. Exercise after eating reduced the post-meal glucose response more effectively than exercise before eating, and the benefit was greatest when movement started soon after the meal was finished. So here's a routine that makes the most sense given all of this. Within 15 minutes of finishing your meal, walk for 10 minutes at a comfortable pace. You do not need to turn it into a workout. You should be able to breathe easily and hold a conversation. That is the right intensity. When walking is not possible, do the seated Soleus push-up. Perform it for a few minutes, rest, and repeat it periodically while you are sitting over the next couple of hours. And do not underestimate normal household movement. Put away the dishes, fold laundry, water your plants, walk through the grocery store, play with your grandchildren. Your body does not know whether movement is officially called exercise. It only knows that muscle is contracting and fuel is being requested. In another controlled study, breaking up evening sitting with brief resistance activities, including bodyweight squats, lowered post-meal glucose and insulin exposure by approximately 31% compared with uninterrupted sitting. The principle is simple. After you eat, do not let your muscles go completely offline. Now, let me explain why this works. Because once you understand it, the whole picture clicks into place. Your skeletal muscle is one of the biggest storage sites for glucose after a meal. Imagine a huge delivery warehouse. Glucose is the delivery trucks arriving with fuel. Insulin is the dispatcher telling the warehouse to open the loading docks. In someone with healthy insulin sensitivity, the loading docks open quickly. The trucks unload. Blood glucose comes back down cleanly. In someone with insulin resistance, the dispatcher's message is weakened. Fewer loading docks open. The trucks line up outside. Glucose stays in the bloodstream longer than it should. When your muscles contract, something different happens. It's as though the workers inside the warehouse open an emergency back door because they need fuel right now. This door operates independently of the dispatcher. That is contraction-mediated glucose uptake, and it's why movement can lower blood sugar even when insulin signal is still impaired. But an emergency back door is not the same as fixing the whole warehouse. And that is the most important thing I want you to take from this video. A post-meal walk or a few Soleus push-ups can lower the glucose response to one meal. That is genuinely valuable, but it does not automatically fix the root cause of insulin resistance. This is where most blood sugar videos stop. They show you a technique that lowers the number on your glucose monitor without ever asking why your body struggled with the carbohydrate in the first place. The carbohydrate is not the injury. It is the stress test that reveals the injury. When someone eats a bowl of oatmeal and their glucose rises sharply, they often conclude that oatmeal is the problem. But that is like blaming a hill for showing that your car has a weak engine. The hill exposed the problem. It did not create it. One of the main drivers of insulin resistance is fat accumulating inside liver and muscle cells in places it was never designed to be stored. That fat disrupts the signaling steps that allow insulin to move glucose into cells. Insulin is still there. The receptor is still there, but the excess fat inside the cell creates interference and the message does not get through clearly. Human research supports this. Higher levels of fat stored inside muscle cells are directly associated with impaired insulin sensitivity measured using magnetic resonance spectroscopy in controlled studies. In a dietary study, a diet very high in total fat and saturated fat reduced insulin sensitivity in adults at risk for metabolic disease. Other research found that saturated fat was more likely than unsaturated fat to increase liver fat and produce harmful changes in glucose and insulin metabolism, even when both diets had similar total calories. This is why we do not tell people to fear bananas, beans, oatmeal, potatoes, or whole grains. Those foods contain carbohydrate, but carbohydrate is not what causes insulin resistance. Fat accumulating inside the wrong cells is. And when you reduce that fat burden, the carbohydrate that used to be a problem starts behaving very differently. This is exactly what Rhonda experienced. She started working with Mastering Diabetes in January with an A1C of 10.9. She changed what she ate, walked consistently after meals, and refused the additional medications her doctor tried to add. By April, her A1C had dropped to 6.5. Her next test came back in the non-diabetic range. She lost 30 pounds, and here is what her doctor said when he saw her results.
I got my A1C and it had gone from 10.9 to 6.5. I'm hoping it's lower today. If I'm reading it right, it says 5.5, 10.9 on January 21 of 26. And today it's 5.5. The doctor encouraged me to take statins. I said, no. And I said, I'm working to reverse that. And he implied that he's never seen anybody do that. I've lost 30 pounds since I started Mastering Diabetes. Easiest I've ever lost weight.
Her doctor had never seen anyone reverse type 2 diabetes before. She became the example he had never seen. That is what happens when you combine consistent post-meal movement with a food pattern that actually addresses the root cause. And this is exactly what the Mastering Diabetes method is designed to do. It combines low-fat, plant-based, whole food nutrition with consistent movement, restorative sleep, stress management, and hydration. Meals are built around whole fruit, legumes, intact whole grains, starchy vegetables, and leafy greens while keeping saturated fat and total dietary fat low. In a 16-week randomized clinical trial published in JAMA Network Open, participants following a low-fat, plant-based diet improved insulin sensitivity while directly reducing both liver fat and fat inside muscle cells. The machinery changed, not just the carbohydrate load. Think of it this way. A post-meal walk helps drain some glucose from the bloodstream right now. That is the emergency loading bay opening. A low-fat, plant-based whole food lifestyle gradually clears the fat buildup that has been jamming the main loading docks for years. That is fixing the warehouse. As insulin sensitivity improves, the same bowl of oatmeal, fruit, beans, or potatoes can produce a completely different glucose response. Not because the food changed, because your body's ability to process it changed. Lenny Triglia lived this. She was 66 years old, diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and her doctor was skeptical that lifestyle change alone could make a difference. She refused medication, applied the Mastering Diabetes approach, and built a consistent movement routine. 1 year later, her A1C went from 6.4 to 5.3. She lost 96 pounds. Her liver enzymes normalized completely. And here is what she said.
My A1C was 6.4 and it is now 5.3. My weight was at 266 pounds and now it's about 170. I feel like I have given my body a chance now to age normally.
From 6.4 to 5.3, fully out of the diabetic range. A doctor who did not believe it was possible proved wrong. That is the goal. Not managing one spike, changing the biology that created the spike. So here is the post-meal protocol I want you to remember. Eat a low-fat, fiber-rich whole food meal. Then begin gentle movement within 15 minutes of finishing. Walk for 10 minutes when you can. When you cannot walk, do the seated Soleus push-up and interrupt long periods of sitting throughout the next couple of hours. Use your glucose meter or continuous glucose monitor to observe and learn, not to judge yourself. Compare similar meals under similar conditions and notice what happens when you add movement. Let the data teach you about your own body. And remember that a lower glucose spike after one meal is not permission to pair carbohydrate with large amounts of saturated fat at the next meal. We are not trying to manipulate one glucose curve while quietly worsening insulin resistance underneath it. We are trying to restore normal carbohydrate tolerance so that eventually the emergency loading bay is not needed as often because the main one is working again. One important safety note: if you use insulin or a medication that increases insulin output, such as a sulfonylurea, physical activity can increase your risk of low blood sugar. Monitor your glucose closely and work with your healthcare provider when making changes to your activity, food, or medication routine. So yes, activating a small muscle in your calf helped reduce post-meal glucose excursion by 52% in a controlled lab setting. That is remarkable. But the bigger lesson is not that scientists found a secret calf trick. The bigger lesson is that your muscles are among the most powerful tools you have for managing glucose. Every time they contract, they create demand for fuel. Every post-meal walk opens more glucose exit ramps. Every resistance session builds more storage capacity. When you combine consistent movement with a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, you are doing more than lowering today's number. You are improving the biology that determines every number after it. If you want our free guide on how to put this all together, comment guide below. If this video helped you see what is actually possible, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who's been told the only way to manage their blood sugar is to eat less carbohydrates. Until next time, keep those carbs high and that A1C low.